Hey guys, welcome out to Revolution this evening. We're going to continue looking at 7 pre-trib problems and the Prewrath Rapture, the full movie. And so we're at the 19-minute 34 mark. And so I've entitled this Examining 7 Pre-trib Problems and the Prewrath Rapture by Nick Sayers Part 2. And so we've entered into the time when they're talking about the Olivet Discourse problem. And so I have gone through this video quite a few times. Now, I just sort of went over this just in the last few minutes on double time, just to sort of refresh myself. Now, this section here tends to be quite complicated, because what they do is they introduce 2 men who apparently are gurus in the pre-trib camp, and they've tried to come up with some answers to certain problems which I don't even see as problems, and then they're sort of saying, well, these guys are wrong. And so it's sort of it's a little bit strange. I guess it's like saying, well, I'm just trying to think of an example off the top of my head. It's like, well, because Trinitarians always just, have the wrong concepts and wrong ideas. Here's 2 scholars who have, come up with some better ideas to explain that. And it's sort of, it just gets so technical that because I don't necessarily agree with their view on the pre-trib problem, and then they're saying, well, these scholars have tried to address this problem, which I don't think even exists. So what we're going to do is we're just going to go through and try and unfold this. And I think what they're doing too is they're going to obscure people, obscure voices. Instead of just sticking with the mainstream voice, they're going to scholars who have different opinions and saying, look, even pre-trib scholars have this opinion. It's like saying, oh, look at this Trinitarian scholar. He has this opinion. And it's like, well, there's so many Trinitarians around. Of course, there's going to be people with different opinions. And they'll say things like, even in their own camp, they think this. And it's like, well, I'm sure there's plenty of people in there who believe in young earth creationism who have some weird ideas, you know what I mean? And I think these guys just really should have stuck with trying to debunk the average pre-trib position, and then sort of moved on from there. These guys they assert a lot of things that aren't really true. They have a lot of straw man argumentation. And so anyway, let's just get straight into it. So I'll just jump into this.
The second pre-trib problem is related to the Olivet Discourse.
Now, this sounds like it's on double time. It is. It's actually on 1.5. I was wondering why it was so fast. I did have it on 1.5. Okay, so here we go.
Which is the name for the teaching about the end times that Jesus gave on the Mount of Olives, recorded in Matthew 24, Mark 13, and Luke 21. Christians throughout the ages have believed this passage to be speaking of the signs leading up to the rapture.
Okay, so notice what they're saying. Okay, Christians throughout the ages, this is what they've thought. Okay, so you got the signs, and it's leading up to the rapture. Well, all of my Christianity, I have been taught and listened to people, and the main thing is this box where it says signs would be from verse 3 down to verse 14, and that would be the pre-rapture verses. It's talking about everything sort of building up and wars and famines and these things are occurring. And then it gets to the place where this gospel of the kingdom is preached in all the world as a witness to all nations, and then the end comes. Because it says, he that endures to the end shall be saved. And it says, then the end shall come. And so from that verse on, for me, that is when it enters into the time of tribulation. In specifically Matthew 24, it does enter into the abomination of desolation, which these guys are agree with my position that it is halfway through the 7-year period. And so I can understand why someone like Thomas Ice, because he thinks that from verse 3 to verse 14 is the first 3.5 years of the book of Revelation, and then say from verse 15 all the way through to verse 29, that's the second half. Now, I can understand someone thinking that. I can understand someone sort of going through those type of understandings in their mind. But for me, and I did go through this in my last video, going through from verse 3 all the way through to verse 14, to me, these are just things that happened before the rapture. These are not, a quarter of the earth dying. These are not, or the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. And these are just things that have happened throughout history. But as we enter into the time before the rapture, these things will increase. And so this is the beginning of sorrows this time. And so to me, I'm open to be persuaded otherwise. I have heard argumentation against my position, but it just hasn't been compelling. For me, throughout my whole Christianity, for 30 years of believing in the pre-tribulation rapture, I've read verse 3 down to verse 14 as happening before the rapture. Now, these guys constantly say throughout this video, you can't have any signs before the rapture, okay? You can't have any precursors and all this sort of stuff. And I understand people do preach, hey, Jesus could come back at any moment. He could come back before the end of this sermon, sort of thing. And I'm in agreement with that. But at the end of the day, these things here are happening, but they're increasing. It talks about persecution. There's more persecution today than ever before. It talks about there's earthquakes, there's famines, there's wars. We're seeing this more and more. And so to me, this is just like someone's got the volume knob and they're turning it up to the point where it's going to be these things are going to be very frequent. And the gospel of the kingdom will be preached in all the world as a witness to all nations, and then the end will come. Now, people haven't known when that's going to happen. I'm sure that in the early church, they were like, well, we've preached in all the known world sort of thing. And they're going out and preaching wherever they can. And they don't know who's become Christian elsewhere on the other side of the earth. And they haven't got the internet. They haven't got telephones to ring up and say, oh, is everyone saved in England by now at the year 500 or whatever? And so, but the gospel has been preached, and we can see that it's going further and further, with telecommunications. We're just seeing more and more people become Christian. So these are signs that appear before the rapture. And so if the rapture happened today, have these signs appeared? For me, yes. If the rapture happens in 500 years, have these signs appeared? Yes. Like if this happened 200 years ago, would have these signs appeared? Well, I guess, perhaps this gospel of the kingdom being preached in all the world as a witness to all nations, because the word nation there is ethnos, meaning ethnic groups. And so, and then the end will come. Oh, but we haven't known. Sometimes, like I've gone to places that have been labeled as the most unreached places in the world. I've gone there, and there are so many churches and so many Christians there that it's just labeled wrong. And that's with modern technology and missionaries going to places, and people are just like, well, these people are unreached. And I actually felt that there was way more per head of population, way more Christians there than in Australia. And so, and that was called an unreached place. They would say Australia is unreached, but if you went downtown and talked to people about Jesus, most people would have no idea about the gospel. And so, so do we know when these things are happening all over the world? Because you can have a full-scale World War II happening somewhere, but people out in the back blocks of Mongolia who don't have the TV, they're like, what's going on? They have no idea what's going on. And so people in the Amazon forest who were just living day to day, and they had no idea what was going on. And so anyway, I think you get my point here. But so these guys are saying this is the traditional way of looking at it. You got your signs that go down to here. Then you've got the rapture that goes down to here. Well, my understanding is traditionally people have seen this as the second coming of Christ. And so now these guys mix the rapture and the second coming, but they're not really, they don't come forward, like they don't have second coming / rapture here. Now, if they had second coming, I'd go, yeah, well, that's what I've understood all my life. And so anyway, I'll just put this picture up here. So what you've got to understand, this pre-wrath position is only new. So let's just look at this book here that came out in 1990. Some believe Jesus could rapture the church at any moment. Others say he won't until the middle of the tribulation. Still others place the rapture at the end of the tribulation. Are any of them right, or does the Bible teach something else? Find out. It's like they haven't really got a position defined. It's like, is it something else? Something new. Now look at this: a new understanding of the rapture. So it's not, they're like, oh, our position is sort of historical. Our position is, something that, all the churches have believed. I've gone through a lot of these videos and listened to a lot of people talk about, the early church writers, they never had a pre-trib position. What about Eusebius? There's so many quotations of Eusebius talking about a pre-trib rapture. But why aren't these guys talking about that? Most of the time they're only talking about Ephraim the Syrian or pseudo Ephraim. What really annoys me the most is these guys constantly are pointing to Schofield and Clarence Larkin, and many times they're pointing to this McDonald lady who started having esoteric visions and speaking in tongues and stuff like that. And it's like, oh, well, she invented the rapture. Oh, the Jesuits invented the rapture. It just becomes this, Texe Marrs-y, weird. They'll just throw out 20 things and say, see, they're all evil, they're all bad, they're all related to Blavatsky somehow. It's like probably just lived in the same country, but it's, they're all evil, wicked, horrible people, and they invented the rapture. And it's like, okay, if you want to start pointing fingers at who started the rapture, that's fine. I'm all for history, but I'm for honest history. Let's turn the tables around. Why is this a new understanding of the rapture if you guys are claiming it's a historical position? Why is this said to be new? Marvin Rosenthal has invented this. So a new understanding of the rapture, the tribulation, and the second coming. Now, let's look at this. Jesus is coming again, but when? What do you believe about Christ's return? With the wisdom and insight of a man who has done his homework, Marvin J. Rosenthal presents a view of the rapture of the church that is not pre-tribulational, not mid-tribulational, not post-tribulational, but pre-wrath. For 30 years, a confirmed pre-tribulationist, he now believes that the church will have to endure the persecution of the Antichrist. God never promised his children immunity from the trials of this godless world or the assault of the Antichrist. He did promise, greater is he, the Holy Spirit, that is in you than he that is in the world, 1 John 4:4. In view of the fact that Christians will not escape all of the oppression of the tribulation period, Rosenthal urges godly living in light of clear understanding of the last days, so that we will be prepared for Satan's intense opposition. Rosenthal does, however, believe that the church will escape the wrath of God, which will be poured out beginning with the opening of Revelation's seventh seal sometime during the second half of the tribulation. So what you got to understand is most of the time I've been dealing with the Andersonite type of thing. We've been looking at their charts, and they're sort of like a mid-trib type of thing, where these guys sort of stretch everything back a little bit to it's sort of about the 5-year and a quarter mark. Okay. And so, for God did not appoint us to wrath, but to obtain salvation through our Lord Jesus Christ. In a readable, informative style, complete with 25 charts, Rosenthal takes a fresh look at the biblical prophecies concerning end times events and helps us understand what impact they could have on our daily Christian lives. He's the director of Zion's Hope. So you're going to see one of the guys in this video is obviously a relative of Rosenthal, and he runs Zion's Hope ministry. So this has been going since the 90s. And for 16 years, he was the editor of one of evangelicalism's, I said that wrong, leading magazines, Israel My Glory, a much in-demand speaker, So he's got all these credentials there. Okay, but the main thing I wanted to point out in all this is that it's a new understanding of the rapture. And in this book, he mentions that this is a new position and it's not a historical position. Okay. So when these guys have got their charts out, and when they got their thing out saying, oh, well, this is what the churches believe, they've usually believed it this way, trying to sort of make out that their position is how the church has always had it. What these guys do is they just get everyone who's not pre-tribulational and they try to relate themselves to them, including Catholics, Orthodox, amillennial, post-millennial, pretty much like anyone who's like, well, we don't believe in the rapture because we don't believe in a futurist position. Well, we can adopt their a few of their positions, and say there's 50 different things that a preterist might have. Maybe there's 3 or 4 that are relative to their position. They tend to just sort of adopt their position and say, well, they believe this. They believe that was the rapture and the second coming at the same time. See, it's a historical position, and it's I'm just not really gelling with that. And I think these guys have got to be honest. Why isn't Tommy McMurtry, Stephen Anderson, why aren't they talking about this? Why aren't they talking about how it's a new understanding of the rapture? And this is where they got their information from. I hear Darby and Clarence Larkin. Like, it's almost like if you just have a Clarence Larkin sign with Tommy McMurtry, says Clarence Larkin. Oh, the Clarence Larkin charts. Oh, he's been reading Clarence Larkin. And it's like almost like a get out of jail free card for him. It's like, well, we can think for ourselves, and we do believe that the pre-trib position is something that is taught in the early church writings. Now, I know some people have said that it's not, but I can clearly prove that, and I will do that as I go through this series on the book of Revelation, and we're going to look at lots of different things and what people thought and what people have said over the years. But if these guys are going to be so, adamant in throwing us into the Darby camp and the Larkin camp and all these other people, just like, with textual criticism, people will throw me under the bus and say I'm a Ruckmanite or I'm a Andersonite or whatever they want to put me in. Like Mark Ward says, I'm a Ruckmanite. And it's like, it's so bizarre. Rick Norris, who frequents our Textus Receptus Academy Facebook page, he just constantly calls people who have made public videos and with Jeff Riddle saying that they are TR only. They've half the time they've written chapters in books about the confessional text and said, hey, I'm not King James only, I'm a TR person. And he would just say, you're a King James only. It's just so lazy. These people are just so lazy, but they want to pigeonhole you because it's easier to discredit you once they pigeonhole you. Once you're labeled as a King James only, they're like, like they might even be halfway through reading your stuff, and then someone goes, you realize that King James only is. It's like, well, I won't continue reading it then, sort of thing, instead of just looking at the facts. And so these guys just want us to be the Darbyites, to be the Larkinites, to be related to some McDowell girl in Scotland or whatever. And this is a genealogical fallacy. When the fact is these guys are projecting onto us exactly what they are doing. Look at this. It's a new understanding of the rapture. The Prewrath position is new. That's why it's gaining popularity, because it started from zero. Now it's getting more and more popular because it's a new fad. It's like the laughing revival of the charismatics, a brand new, there might have been spatterings of it throughout history, but the whole Rodney Howard Brown, coming in and waving his hand over the crowd, and Benny Hinn doing the same and all that, and everyone laughing and saying it's a laughing revival. That was a new move of the Holy Spirit and all this rubbish. This is a new eschatology. So why aren't these guys either embracing that or showing where these guys are wrong? Because obviously the new IFB, they don't have the same timeline as these guys. But see, then you'll get someone like Donnie on Standing for Truth. He thinks that Kirshner has a lot of really good material. He praises Kirshner. Now, as I've said quite frequently, Kirshner, he has co-written, or when I say co-written, he has provided a lot of information for James White's King James Only book. If you just go to the front introduction, he wants to especially thank Alan Kirshner, who provided invaluable resources and suggestions from his own knowledge of the textual critical field. And so a lot of people don't realize that these guys, Alan Kirshner also many times is quoting D.A. Carson, who wrote the King James Only, A Plea for Realism book, And so anyway, we've got a few comments here. I'll just jump in there. So Hudson is saying, hi, Nick. Hey, Hudson, good to see you. Philip Evans says, in 1 Thessalonians 3:9, wrath is contrasted with salvation, not location. Yeah, and so I think it's a false dichotomy. And I mentioned this in my debate with Tommy McMurtry. You've got the Ruckmanites on one side saying, God hasn't appointed us to wrath, so we're going to be raptured out before the tribulation period. Then you've got these guys, the pre-wrath guys, and they're saying, well, God is going to rapture us out before the wrath of God comes down upon the earth. And so then they've got, the different timings, and some people are like, well, the wrath of God is not going to be until, Revelation chapter 6, right at the end there, when they say, oh, the wrath of the Lamb has come, and, and they're trying to pinpoint this time. I don't think it's a time. I think it's just talking about that God doesn't pour out his wrath upon his own people. And so, of course, there's a whole problem with some pre-tribbers. They conflate tribulation with wrath, which is wrong. But when you look at the Passover, God was fully able to go past one door that had the blood on, the lamb's blood on it. Then the next door, he was able to not only pour his wrath out upon that house, but it was specifically upon the firstborn son. And so he is, like, with pinpoint accuracy, able to pour out the wrath where it's needed. And so those who don't experience that wrath, the believers don't experience that wrath. So that's what that verse is saying, not, well, this is a timeline, So So yeah, very good point there, Philip Evans. Edward says, recently did a video called The Doctrine of Future Events. I have a feeling you will agree with his conclusion. Okay, so this is Hudson saying that Edward PF123 did this. Okay, so that's cool. So Philip says, I know Donnie. And so, yeah, I've done quite a few debates on Donnie's channel. I've sort of separated myself from them a bit just due to the overall sort of Andersonite view of a lot of those people. And if you sort of step out of the boundaries of, if you start treading on their toes with their core teachings, their Andersonite type teachings, they just turn on you like ravenous wolves. And so I'm like, well, yeah, I don't have to put up with that. And I just can't really be bothered dealing with people who, instead of looking at logic and, looking up things in a dictionary and things like that, these guys just tend to slander and just repeat things over and over and just get louder. And it's like, I can't really be bothered with that. So usually that's why I try to control my own platform. But I thought, those guys would, hear me out. But I sort of knew that once I started talking about eschatology, that I had a pre-trib position, they were going to mock me. And so, and that sort of came out, and I just thought, well, I really don't want people to be put in a position where they think that I'm in agreement with that type of behavior. The Steven Anderson behavior, the reason Steven Anderson gets persecuted is because he's a jerk. I mean, look at Jordan Peterson is not a Christian. Neither is Ben Shapiro. But these guys get the same type of persecution from the same type of people. So is that it's really more so they're trying to protect society and schools and you know what I mean? It's like, are they getting persecuted because they're just genuine, born again Christians loving your neighbor? No, it's usually because they got weird, strange things and they want Obama to be assassinated, and it's just bizarre, So it's more like a patriotism. The reason Steven Anderson got his head smashed into the window and into the glass by the border cops is because he was being patriotic, and we all go, yeah, that's great. Anyone doing that, we cheer them on. And we watch police brutality videos, and we get disgusted in that, and we think, man, someone's got to stand up to it. And so he did that, but it was not for Christianity. It wasn't that he was persecuted for Christianity. And so I think like someone like Ken Hovind was persecuted for being a Christian, most definitely. But anyway, so let's move on from this picture here, and let's just continue. So as I was saying, my signs are more up here. They're saying this is the historical signs all the way down here, and this is the rapture. Well, more so this would be the second coming. Okay, so let's just continue.
In other words, they believed that the signs that Jesus tells his disciples about in the Olivet Discourse are signs that will happen before the rapture, and that the rapture itself is pictured in Matthew 24.
So you notice they're not even really saying the main issue. The main issue is that these guys have reinterpreted the second coming of Christ with the rapture. Okay, so they've gone, okay, we understand most people would see this as the second coming of Christ, but let's just turn it into the rapture, and let's just call it the rapture all the way through this video, instead of saying like clearing things up and saying, okay, well, most people, they have viewed this as the second coming. Now, in our brand new eschatology, which has been around since about 1990, what we've done is we've gotten this verse and we think that this is the rapture and the second coming at the same time, and and they've redefined their terms. But what they really need to do is define for us their terms so that we know where they're going with this, because a lot of people don't know, and they get through this video and they're like, the rapture's there, and they just get confused.
Verses 30 to 31, which says, "Then will appear in heaven the sign of the Son of Man, and then all the tribes of the earth will mourn, and they will see the Son of Man coming on the clouds of heaven with power and great glory. And he will send out his angels with a loud trumpet call, and they will gather his elect from the four winds, from one end of heaven to the other." There are lots of reasons to believe that the rapture is being described in Matthew 24.
Okay, so if they're making their own case, it's like, okay, well, that's what you think, that's what you believe. But you've got to be very clear that most Christians see that this is the second coming of Christ and not the rapture. So these guys are like, well, it's the rapture. And specifically the rapture, the pre-tribulational rapture, most people are not looking at this as the rapture of the church. And so these guys might, and it's like, okay, well, you can believe the moon's made out of cheese if you want, So I'm not coming against you for that. It's like that's how you're viewing it. But you just got to make things very clear.
Starting with the clear parallels between the events described in Matthew 24.
Okay, so that slide went really quick. So Let's just go back a bit.
24. Starting with the clear parallel.
Okay, the clear parallels appear in heaven. Son of Man coming on clouds of heaven, sending out his angels with a loud trumpet call. They gather his elect from one end of heaven to the other. And so what I've done sometimes with this one, if we just go to Revelation 11, because as I've pointed out, there are 7 different types of resurrection / raptures that happen in the book of Revelation. Okay, so if we just look at one of them, I'm actually going to go to the no, I don't want Bible Gateway. There's so many ads on that. I might go to KJV, and we can go to King James Bible Online rather than Bible Gateway with all their ads. So when we look at this, it says, these 2 prophets, we know about 2 prophets that get resurrected. Okay, so it's after 3 days and a half, the spirit of life from God entered into them, and they stood upon their feet, and great fear fell upon them which saw them. And they heard a great voice from heaven saying unto them, Come up hither. And they ascended up into heaven in a cloud, and their enemies beheld them. Okay, so let's just look at, even I don't think this is related whatsoever. Okay, I think it is a type of resurrection / rapture, but I just want to show you the similarities that anyone can sort of read into. So you've got this appear in heaven. So they've got this voice from heaven. So there's something in heaven calling down to them. So most people would think that would be Jesus. Okay. Then you've got the Son of Man coming on the clouds. And so they ascended up to heaven in a cloud. And so that, you could say, oh, 1 Thessalonians chapter 4, the rapture, he sent out his angels with a loud trumpet call. And it says here, we hear with a great voice from heaven saying to them, Come up hither. And they ascended up into heaven in a cloud. So you could look at, lots of similarities just with this one rapture. So we've looked at, the symbolic rapture of John in Revelation chapter 4, verse 1. And then we know that the church has already been resurrected, because in Revelation chapter 5, if you're reading a King James, it fits. If you're reading the modern versions, it won't. So that's why Kirshner and the guys, they have convinced a lot of KJV people like Donnie to forsake what the Word of God says, and to follow Kirshner, and to follow men, and to follow traditions of men, and this new fandangled new eschatology. But you can see that the rapture's already happened then. So then you see another rapture resurrection happens. But this is actually a rapture resurrection of only dead people. So that's in Revelation chapter 6, and it's fulfilled in chapter 7. So God in chapter 6 says to these people, look, wait a little longer until your brethren are killed just as you were. So they're all going to die. And then we see that fulfilled in Revelation chapter 7, where it's John says that they all came out of great tribulation. So they all came out of persecution. So they all died. There wasn't anyone alive raptured then. And so we see that occurring. So that's the second type of resurrection rapture type of thing. And, of course, we see, this one with the 2. And then we look at Revelation chapter 14, where we see 2 happen, where we see 144,000 before the throne. So there has to be, a resurrection rapture type of thing happening there. Then we see in Revelation 14 again, there is a reaping. And so that's another one. And then we see in Revelation chapter 15, these people who have overcome the beast and sang the song of the Lamb and all this sort of stuff. So they, it's another type. And then we see right at the end, when Christ comes, he comes on his horse, and the armies of heaven follow him. And that's when that marries up with this verse and these other verses in the synoptics, that talk about him gathering everyone together. So it's a great gathering. So that's another type of a rapture. So these 7 distinct events happen. So, but these guys, they want to sort of squish everything together. Now, I know the Andersonites tend to pancake everything on top of each other, but at least these guys try and sort of have a bit more of a 7-year tribulation period, even though that they mightn't call it the tribulation, due to it only happening in certain pockets. They do tend to have a little bit more sound eschatology than the Andersonites, because the Andersonites do the great folding, but these guys do the great stretching, where they stretch the seals out. They see the seals are so important that they stretch them out for almost the whole book of Revelation, which the book of Revelation doesn't do that. It just mentions them in Revelation 6, 7, then it moves on to a whole bunch of other things. So these guys just want to focus on, it's like me just getting the vials and stretching them out and going, these are the most important things. And it's like, why are you seeing that? It's just completely unnecessary. And so they're making mountains out of molehills in many instances. So let's just continue.
Between the events described in Matthew 24.
Okay, so we've got Matthew 24, context of parousia, 24, most of that, surviving believers delivered, 24, so it's all 24. Okay, so the initiation of the parousia, universal perception, Jesus with clouds, angelic presence, trumpet call, and gathering. Okay, so you got all these type of things happening.
4, and the events described in other rapture passages.
Okay, so like I just did, I can get other rapture passages where it's talking about the 2 witnesses, and you can sort of get, you mightn't get all of them, but you can sort of get like out of 8, you can get like 6. It's like you can get they've been resurrected. That you can get them, going up in a cloud, all this sort of stuff. The clouds there, someone's calling them up. It's most likely Jesus. He's been taken up, or they're being taken up to meet the Lord in the air. You can relate that to 1 Thessalonians 4 and all that sort of stuff. So what I'm saying is, when you go through these particular rapture resurrections, there's many similarities between them. And so just as much as any time when someone is spoken of being in hell, there's probably similarities there as well. Now, one thing that came to me the other day, I might be diverting a little bit, but I remember it's probably 6 months ago when I was listening to some of Donnie's material, and he was saying, how stupid is it in the book of Revelation chapter 4, verse 1, where they say it's the rapture? How dumb's that, And it's like, no, we're not saying that is the rapture. It's symbolic of what, every individual goes through. So they hear the voice like a trumpet saying, come up hither. And just like these 2 witnesses, they heard come up hither as well, the exact same Greek, except it's in the plural, because John was singular and these are 2 people. And it's the same in English, come up hither, but he says it's not a rapture. And Paul he mentions harpazo twice. He says, I was caught up to the 3rd heaven. And he mentions pretty much exactly the type of thing that John saw. But he calls it a harpazo twice, which is the exact word for rapture. So that's why I say it's a rapture. You know what I mean? It's like, it's sort of like a no-brainer. But a lot of these guys can't go to the Greek because they've been Gail Riplingerized. It's like, oh, no, Gail Riplinger said you can't use a dictionary, so I don't. It's like, don't be afraid to, study a little bit of Hebrew and Greek and do a word study. These guys are like, you have to only use English words. And that's why Stephen Anderson gets into the trouble that he's in with the kooky claim that Jesus roasted like a chicken in hell for your salvation. It's bizarre. That's his gospel. And all these guys believe it. And you won't get that in any other version except for the King James, because they redefine the word hell. And so I believe hell is an eternal place of punishment, and it will go on forever and ever and ever. But originally, hell just meant a place of like a prison cell. So it's the biblical narrative that gives color to that word and makes it into what it is known as today. But originally, people knew that hell was a place where it was just a holding cell. It's just the abode of the dead. And so you can either go to paradise, or you could go to Sheol, Hades. And having the word hell there in 1611, people knew that the word hell just meant a place where you are restricted because you've died. You're in that place. And then Jesus, so they say, oh, Jesus went to hell. He went to a burning hell. And it's like they're putting a modern, anachronistically putting a modern definition of hell, because most people just think of hell as a burning place now. And they're putting that definition in the book of Acts, when clearly the book of Acts is talking historically about prophecies about the Messiah using the word Sheol, which is translated as Hades. And so before the resurrection, there was an upper Sheol where the righteous were. That's where Jesus went for 3 days and 3 nights. He said to the thief on the cross, today you will be with me in paradise. But he's like, no. He roasted like a chicken as an animal sacrifice for your sin. It's like, man, that is heretical. But you got Tommy McMurtry believing that. You've got Donnie believing that. You got all these weird doctrines, and it's like, I can't get around it, and I can't keep my mouth shut anymore. These guys are following Anderson and his kooky king. You guys know I support the King James. You guys know I'll support and fight to the nth degree over the most trivial, Revelation 16:5 and Easter and all these other things. But when it comes down to it, that doctrine is only in a modern kooky King James only camp. And it's weird, man. And they believe Jesus roasted like a chicken. But anyway, I sort of diverging, and I've sort of forgotten where I was actually going. So I should just continue.
Passages such as 1 Thessalonians 4, verses 16 and 17, which says, for the Lord...
Actually, I remembered my thought now, because I mentioned that they were saying, in Revelation chapter 4, verse 1, it's only one guy who gets resurrected, and he doesn't even like go on into heaven and everything like that. He comes back. John came back and wrote the book of Revelation. So how can this be a rapture? Not even thinking that like the harpazo, like that Philip experienced, he went up and went back. He just went to a different place. The same harpazo experience, they're caught up. But half the time they don't even know that word harpazo is there, because they're not allowed to look at the Greek, But then they will quote Kirshner and others who don't believe in the Textus Receptus. But what I found was Stephen Anderson, he believes Jesus went to hell and then came back. So isn't that exactly what these guys are mocking and saying, well, John, he got raptured, but then he came back. Well, aren't they saying Jesus went and roasted like a chicken in hell and then he came back? You know what I mean? Like he went to a place where you shouldn't really come back from. And, but he did, he came back. So John, he did the same thing. He went to a place you shouldn't really come back from, but he came back, So they're saying how dumb that is. It's like, well, you're inadvertently saying that your doctrine is dumb too. It's like, anyway, I was thinking about it the other day, just going, man, the more I think about this, the sillier the opposition gets. But anyway.
The Lord himself will descend from heaven with a cry of command, with the voice of an archangel, and with the sound of the trumpet of God. And the dead in Christ will rise first. Then we who are alive, who are left, will be caught up together with them in the clouds, to meet the Lord in the air. And so we will always be with the Lord.
Jesus' description of his coming in Matthew chapter 24, verses 29 through 31, parallels, ideally Paul's description of the rapture in 1 Thessalonians chapter 4, verses 13.
They keep saying this, but it doesn't. You can clearly see that in the context, this is a build-up that it's going through the last 3.5 years of the tribulation period, and you can clearly see that when you go through. If you just read the book of Revelations from and the book of the Revelation from chapter 13 all the way through to chapter 19, if you read that, you can see the parallels of Matthew 24 from verse 15 down to verse 29. You can look at that and say, yeah, well, that's what's happening. And even what's described about the woman being Israel, that she is still there during the first 3.5 years she's protected, but the second 3.5 years she's not protected. And the devil is wrath with her, and the devil's gone to make war with her and with her seed, the remaining church. And it says who remain and have the testimony, who keep the commandments of God and the testimony of Jesus Christ. And so it's talking about the Christians in that tribulation period, the last 3.5 years. And so when you look at all this type of evidence, it's very clear of what's being talked about. But these guys want to conflate those.
Through 17. And Paul confirms this through.
Okay, so this is the same thing that I read before, but yeah, Paul confirms it, and all this sort of stuff.
Many linguistic connections in his first epistle to the Thessalonians.
So what I find is there is a real simplicity in the studying of the pre-wrath rapture, which is avoiding context and using like a Strong's Concordance type of study, where people just look up the word cloud and go, well, there's another cloud. I think that fits as well. Or there's an angel. Well, there's an angel here as well. So that must be the same event, instead of looking through the context. And so this is the strange thing when, especially when dealing with the Andersonites, they just tend to grab the whole entire chapters and just go, well, that's the same as this other chapter. And they just pancake them on top of each other. And it just destroys the narrative, because when you're going through, you're looking at a chronological sequence in the book of Revelation. That you got the first 3.5 years from Revelation chapter 6 to Revelation chapter 12, first 3.5 years, and then from 13 to 19, the last 3.5 years. So simple. But they just go, no, that's got to be, Revelation chapter 12 is a millennium period, or 11, I think, is a millennium period. And then there's a great reset where you press the reset button and it folds over itself. And so then you've got to go, Revelation chapter 8 is talking about Revelation, chapter 14, or whatever they do. Half the time it's almost impossible to match it all up. But that's what they do. But these guys at least don't do that. So I guess in a way, because I'm sort of throwing this 7 Pretrib problems and pre-wrath rapture, I'm throwing this in as a bit of bonus material. I might be actually misrepresenting some of the things that these guys say, and I'm like more focused on more Anderson this and Anderson that. But I do want to understand where they're coming from, and so we'll continue through, and I'll look up a few things.
There are tons of parallels. Everything from the angels and the trumpet.
Okay, so here we go. Christ is the source. Okay, so let's just see. They're saying, okay, these are all parallels. Okay, and so let's have a look. Matthew 24, 3 and 4. I know that says, what shall be the sign of thy coming and the end of the age? Beware that no man deceive you, for many shall come in my name, saying, I am Christ, and shall deceive many. So Paul, parallels of the second coming, Christ is the source. Paul and 1st and 2nd Thessalonians, 1 Thessalonians 4:15 says, behold, I show you a mystery, for we shall not all sleep, but we shall all, no, that's actually 1 Corinthians. I'll get 1 Thessalonians 4. because half the time they're showing these charts and you go through it and it's like, well, what are you trying to say here? It's just a bunch of numbers on a page. And so they're saying that this matches up with Matthew 24, 3 and 4, which I'll get in another Matthew 24, 3 to 4. Okay, we don't want the NIV. So they're saying these two match up. Okay, so this is why I hate the Bible Gateway, because you get these stupid ads. Okay, and Jesus said to them, see ye not all these things? Verily I say to you. Okay, so it's 3 to 4, wasn't it? And as he sat upon the Mount of Olives, the disciples came to him privately, saying, Tell us, when shall these things be, and what shall be the sign of thy coming and the end of the world? And Jesus answered and said to them, Take heed that no man deceive you. So they're saying that Christ is the source. Okay, and so let's go to 4:15. For this we say unto you by the word of the Lord, that we which are alive and remain until the coming of the Lord shall not prevent them which are asleep. Okay, so what they're trying to say is, they're saying this by the word of the Lord. They're saying, oh, this is from the book of Matthew. They're quoting from the book of Matthew. This we say unto you by the word of the Lord. So they're saying, oh, well, Jesus, he mentioned this, so that's we're teaching what Jesus taught, sort of thing. So the subject matter, the parousia, do not be deceived. So look, that's 2 Thessalonians 2:3. Okay, well, alarmed that the end has come. Antichrist, temple desolation, back to back, rapture and wrath. Thief in the night. So anyway, there's quite a lot of stuff to go through there, but I only just know that first one because I've listened through their video, and they do make out that that Paul got his doctrine from Jesus, and he's saying, you know, this I say unto you by the word of the Lord, as if that this whole concept is being taught here. So they're saying, well, you know, because it's not mentioned, it must be exactly what it says in Matthew 24, 29 to 31, where it's the parousia, etc. So anyway, we're just looking at this, trying to understand where they're coming from.
Trumpet and the gathering of God's elect, but also, you know, the thief in the night.
Okay, so just notice there, AlanKirshner.com, copyright 2013 by Alan Kirshner. So this, I think this whole video was made by Kirshner.
The gathering of God's elect, but also, you know, the thief in the night imagery, the drunkenness versus sobriety imagery.
The problem with this for the pre-tribber is that if the rapture is in view in verses 30 and 31, it leads to the conclusion that there must be precursors or signs before. So
here we go with the whole, there must be precursors and signs and all this sort of stuff. And it's like, even like the Left Behind movies are sort of like, well, the signs are all there. You know, they're talking about signs. You know what I mean? I just can't. These guys have just gotten such a narrow view of, you know, some pre-tribbers say there's absolutely nothing that is going to come before the rapture. So that's the narrative we're going to go with, and we're going to just we're just going to point that out all the way through our video. And it's like, even the ones that they say is deceiving everyone, the Left Behind series or whatever, most of the time they're like, well, yeah, this is happening. Oh, they're about to rebuild the temple. Oh, they're about to the mark of the beast, the technology's there. Oh, they're about to have a one world currency. Oh, they're about to have, looking for signs, looking for the puppy feet of something that bigger that's going to happen. And so then these guys come along and say, they're saying there's no signs. And so they just oversimplify this whole concept of no signs. And I know some pre-tribbers do that. But like, say, when I would listen to, say, Dave Hunt. Now, when the Y2K thing came along, and, you get these type of characters here who, like with Texe Marrs, trying to spook the whole world that the Y2K thing was going to be the beginning of the tribulation period and all this. When the Y2K thing came along, but that was supposed to be, the big thing that, Texe Marrs is saying was the end and all the rest of it. But so these guys, they have, I'm just trying to get my thoughts here. So they have a real simplistic type of thing where it's like, these signs can't come before a rapture. Now, I know there are some pre-tribbers who say that type of thing, but most of the time, that's what I was saying with Dave Hunt. When Texe Marrs got it wrong, when these other guys got it wrong, and they sort of predicted the beginning of the tribulation and got it wrong, just like Ken Hovine does all the time now. He's like, I think we're in the tribulation, all this rubbish. Dave Hunt wisely just said, if you read in Matthew 24, it says, see that you be not troubled. And he said, these people who are coming against, the pre-trib rapture and all the rest of it, and who were promoting that the Y2K was the beginning of the tribulation. And these guys weren't reading this, where it says, be ye not troubled. And so that's what Dave Hunt put it in that perspective of the pre-rapture signs that we're to look for, and said, don't be troubled, because the end is not yet. So the whole concept here is, what should be the sign of your coming and the end of the age, or the end of the world, meaning that right at the end here, and it's interesting, it says, for the end is not yet, okay. Then you read on and it says, but he that endures to the end shall be saved. Then it says, this gospel of the kingdom shall be preached to the whole world as a witness to all nations, and then the end shall come. So it mentions this ending. And then it talks about, abomination, desolation, and it talks about all this stuff that's happening in the middle of the tribulation period. So to me, this is all stuff that's before the tribulation. And so these guys just keep coming along and saying, well, they're saying that there's no signs. Look, see, we've got them again. And it's like, man, if that's your only argument, it's pretty poor. It might get some Ruckmanites here and there, or whoever's saying that. But for me, most people, for all my Christian life and listening to pre-trib guys, that they're pointing out that this part from verse 3 down to verse 14 is before the rapture of the church. And so I preach about these signs. These signs are happening all today.
For the rapture. Because in context, there are lots of signs that happen before the events in verses 30 and 31. For example, a straightforward reading of this passage means that before the rapture can take place, the following events will happen first. A number of smaller signs Jesus...
So, it's birth pains here. Well, there's heaps of things. It talks about persecution, talks about famines and wars and da-da-da. And so that's where I would draw my red line there and cut it off. But they're like abomination, desolation, da-da-da, so.
This calls birth pains. The abomination of desolation, when the Antichrist declares himself to be God in the temple at the midpoint.
And the thing is, if you got birth pains, that means it hasn't been delivered yet. That's why I believe after verse 14, the 7-year tribulation has been kicked off, and there is a deliverance of there is a delivery of that time.
Point. A great persecution like none that has ever been seen in history. A false...
We call it the tribulation, but why not conflate that with daily tribulation? And just go through the Strong's Concordance and say, see, it says tribulation here, tribulation there. And it's like, it's the dumbest thing I've ever seen anyone do, because it says it's a time that never has been and never will be again. But they go, well, John was in tribulation. It's like, well, but it was in the Great Tribulation. But it says tribulation. It's like it just goes over their head.
Falling away or an apostasy from the faith. And an ominous sign in the sun, moon, and stars followed immediately by the rapture. As we have seen, the idea of precursors before the rapture is unacceptable with pre-tribbers because it would mean that the rapture is...
It's just a lie. They've just created the straw man. Now, I know some people would agree with that, but it's not everyone. And all my life I've heard people preach this section and say this is before the rapture, that we will see all these things happen. And so then you get all these people saying, oh, you just want to escape persecution. Well, in my timeline, it says that many shall be offended and betray one another and hate one another, and they'll deliver you up and kill you, and it's talking about persecution. So no, we have persecution in our pre-rapture concepts in Matthew 24, Luke 21, Mark 13, and it fits perfectly in with a pre-trib timeline. But these guys are like, oh, there's no precursors. Now, someone like Thomas Ice, where he believes that this is the first 3.5 years of the tribulation, yeah, well, he might say that. But it's like, and I know Kirshner's debated Thomas Ice, but just because Thomas Ice is the head of the Pretrib Research Center doesn't mean that he's always correct or his views are always seen as right, or there are plenty of people who believe what I'm saying here.
Not imminent. In other words, if the rapture is what is being referred to in verses 30 and 31 of Matthew 24, it would mean that there are things that will happen first, that the rapture can't occur at any moment, and most significantly, it would mean that the church will face the Antichrist persecution before the rapture.
Okay.
After the...
It's just not convincing at all. It's like, to me, they're just misrepresenting what people believe. They're just conflating verses and saying, well, this isn't the second coming, this is the rapture. And then look straight into Darby. Well, every time you show Darby, I'm going to show this guy and say, this is a new understanding of the rapture. Rosenthal. So you guys are all Rosenthalites. That's who you follow.
The pre-trib view was proposed in the mid-1800s, all these problems in the Olivet Discourse were immediately recognized, and a new sort of anti-Matthew 24 movement began.
So I'd really like to see this better documented. Now, perhaps there's books out on this and all the rest of it, and they're just showing a video, but it's just sort of like, that they didn't like Matthew 24. All of a sudden, okay. I just feel that they're already misrepresenting, things that pre-trib people would say just in general. So why would I believe historically what they got to say? Pre-trib guys, this and that, and they're not being honest with where they got their position from either. It's not that they're not being honest; they're just ignoring all that, and they're saying, "Oh, ours is a historical position."
At first, they essentially taught people not to pay attention to this section of Scripture at all.
Okay, so who said this? What have footnotes?
They said it was only meant for those left behind, such as Jews or the so-called tribulation saints. Arguments for this would begin by saying things like, Matthew is a particularly Jewish gospel, and because of the Jewish focus of the book of Matthew, this section was not meant for the church. Thankfully, this particular line of argumentation has been mostly rejected in recent years. even pre-tribulational scholars have come to realize its flaws.
Even pre-tribulational scholars have come to realize their flaws. You know, there's so many people who believe in pre-trib. It's like anyone can just write a book or be a part of the Dallas Theological Seminary or whatever, and it's like, oh, well, see, they're starting to realize this and that, and it's like, no, it doesn't mean, like, even these guys acknowledging a flaw doesn't mean that most pre-tribbers are going to agree with them acknowledging a flaw. I see people acknowledging, oh, there's a mistake in the King James Bible, this and that, and then when you look at it, it's just the dumbest thing you've ever seen. That doesn't mean that people who are TR people or King James people have all of a sudden, we're coming around and Mark Ward's right and James White's right. It's like, no, this is just one dude, so.
For example,
So he's saying here, most pre-tribulationists have insisted that the group being addressed in the discourse is Israel, not the church. It is true that the Gospel of Matthew is addressed primarily to the Jews. However, it is also not the only gospel to mention church, ecclesia. Matthew 16 to 18, 18 to 17, the Great Commission in Matthew 28, 19 to 20 is given to the church, not Israel. So it's not impossible that Matthew and Jesus address the church as well as the Jews in different portions of the disclosure. Okay, so that's his point of view. To me, Matthew is not something that's just written to the Jews. It's written to everyone. The Great Commission is for everyone. But the thing is, the whole concept of the Bible being written firstly to Jews is a very clear concept that we must understand. We've got to look at the audience. And so, you got most of the subject matter is to do with Jesus, who was Jewish, who had 12 disciples who were all Jewish, who was in mostly just talking about Israel, hardly ever mentioning other places. And the people who wrote this down, the Gospel of Matthew, was Jewish. Matthew was Jewish. And so there's obviously going to be Jewish overtones here. And so, and clearly it does talk about this when it says about the Sabbath day, pray that your flight is not in winter, etc. It talks about, you get this picture of people being in that region. That's why, not because of Matthew having a Hebrew Matthew that Origin talked about, or it's because the context warrants that it is talking about the Jewish people. Now, yes, it can, Jesus can prophetically talk about the church, etc., but he is specifically talking to Jewish people, and he's mentioning things like the Sabbath. How many Gentiles are keeping the Sabbath? You know what I'm saying?
They point out that Matthew might be the most church-focused gospel of them all. It's the only one that mentions the Great Commission.
Notice that the last 12 verses of Mark don't exist in Alan Kirshner's mind because, of textual scholarship. So he would rather throw out 1,637 manuscripts that have the last 12 verses of Mark, and he goes with Vaticanus and Sinaiticus. And it actually, those two manuscripts have the room to have those words in it, the last 12 verses of Mark, which has the Great Commission in it. So it's go into the world and preach the gospel to every creature. And so he's like, no, the Great Commission is only in Matthew. And so isn't that amazing that text criticism affects these guys so much? And so someone like Donnie, Standing for Truth, Praise I Am, these other guys involved with that type of movement, Kent Hovind, many times that they're following these type of guys and these teachings about the last days and about eschatology. And these guys err a lot when they're quoting the Bible, because many times they're chopping out 12 verses here, 12 verses there. The Commuhanium here, specific verses in Revelation chapter 5 about us and we, when it's talking about people being in heaven, where the modern versions say you and your, talking about other people, talking about people, I guess, who haven't been resurrected yet. So you have a biased Bible.
And the section on church discipline in chapter 18. In fact, Matthew is the only gospel that uses the word church at all.
But that's kind of strange, because these guys later on talk about, there is this thing where people say, well, the word church doesn't appear from Revelation chapter 4 all the way through to Revelation chapter 19, so the church isn't in the tribulation. And so, but then they'll say, well, what about other words like tribulation, like saints? They've come out of the great tribulation, these saints. They're the church, and rightfully so, they're pointing that out. But then here it's like, oh, you have to have the word church, ecclesia, to be talking about the church. It's like, no, clearly in Luke and in Mark and in John, that he is referring to a future time when there is a church, and he's calling them different things. And so he doesn't always use the word ecclesia for each point. And now I haven't even done a word study into this, but it'd be quite surprising, or I should say it would be not surprising if the word church appears perhaps in other gospels, but the words are omitted or something. The NIV doesn't have this. The NA 28 has omitted this. And so half the time you can't trust that one, because the Great Commission does appear in Mark, but not in their Bible. Church discipline, okay, I'll give them that. But then this one, I'm just not sure. I would have to do a full word study into that, grab the Strong's Concordance out and look up the word church and just make sure, And so we won't do that at the moment. But unfortunately, when you're going through material that is based upon modern Bibles and modern corrupted versions, which are based upon the Nestle Land, Westcott and Hort type text, you just don't know what you're in for.
If you're going to make the argument that Matthew chapter...
So notice Rosenthal. Okay, so he must be like the son or something like that. And so Rosenthal, and he is the director of Zion's Hope. So this is the co-director of Zion's Hope. So there you go.
Chapter 24 is not for believers. Are you going to make the same argument 2 chapters later when Jesus institutes the ordinance of the communion?
I mean, the thing is, Jesus institutes the communion, says, do this in remembrance of me. Talking to the 12 disciples, continue on to do this. But clearly he's talking about a future event in Matthew 24. And he's talking about the Sabbath day and things like that. He's talking about Jewish things and Jewish concepts. And so naturally you would assume that he's talking about Jewish people. So to just like put that type of standard on a chapter 2 chapters later and say, oh, is he just talking to Jewish people to do the communion? It's like, well, if he was saying talking about certain days and he was predicting the future or something like that, it's a completely different context. And it's not wise to just get something like that. Now, if he was predicting something, yes, but he is actually initiating a custom, which we do today. And so, you can't compare apples and oranges.
It's a real problem for pre-tribulationists in that regard.
Pre-tribulationists.
So notice these are let's get the weirdest photos of the weirdest guys you've ever seen. And so I might do the same with these guys here. So what I'll do is I'll get him, I'll cut his head out, get Texe Marrs, Stephen Anderson, a whole bunch of other guys, and just put all them together, and and just sort of say, you guys get your doctrine from them, not from the Bible. That's the accusation here.
Did come up with one interpretation of Matthew 24 that seemed to stick. In the mid-1800s, they began to teach that verse 31 was not the rapture at all, but some other event that occurred at the end of the 7-year period. Most often, they said it referred to the Battle of Armageddon in Revelation 19.
Now, I've heard some people say that it's the Battle of Armageddon. I'm just not convinced about that. It's never sat right with me when people have said that. I've always viewed the Battle of Armageddon to be something that occurs before the second coming of Jesus. And it's just sort of happening in the background, and then Jesus turns up, so it's not like, okay, the Battle of Armageddon's there, and then we all like attack Jesus or whatever, it's they all attack Jesus. It's, to me, they're separate events, and because I've always read the book of Revelation and going through it chronologically, to me, it's like the Battle of Armageddon sort of appears beforehand. It mightn't be long beforehand, but it's, yes, all the armies are gathered together in a certain place, but I just don't see that the second coming is the Battle of Armageddon. To me, that's what Jehovah's Witnesses say. I don't agree with them on much, but anyway, that's my perspective.
Where Jesus descends to battle with the armies of the Antichrist.
Historically, classical pre-tribbers would not allow the rapture to be put in the proximity of Matthew 24 and 25. They argue that the rapture is nowhere to be seen there, that any mention of a coming of Christ in that passage it refers to Armageddon.
Okay, so I'm going to go through historically, like some of these books, and specifically some of these books that are before Darby and before Schofield, and like there was one written about 50 years before Darby, and the guy who wrote it actually did time in prison over that. And also the early church writers who were known as the early church fathers by a lot of people. And so I'll go through them. So Matthew 24, trumpet sounds, 1 Thessalonians 4, trumpet sounds, Revelation 19. Okay, so it's like, they haven't mentioned the trumpet sound there, so it's a completely different event. But if you just see, this is the problem. It's like a Strong's Concordance type thing. Well, the trumpet's mentioned, or the clouds are mentioned, but it's not mentioned here, so it can't be it, So we'll just read the context. If you read the context clearly, it's talking about when Christ comes to earth. He's coming down from heaven, and then he comes to earth. And read the Old Testament. There's so many verses that talk about his coming. And they would include a lot of this stuff. And so you have to know more than just, the basic sort of, rapture. And they think these are all the same anyway, so it's like, yeah, it's just a strange thing to just exclude, because Revelation 19, what does that become then? It's like, okay, that's the rapture, second coming. That's the rapture, second coming. Oh, what's this then? Okay, he's coming on a white horse. And so notice the 3 dung-dungs there and the 4 here. So none of it matches up. Oh, it can't be, And so it's just utterly strange. Where, sorry, I'm sort of losing my voice here a little bit. Where I would love to just go through some of the passages that talk about when Christ does come, and Revelation 19, and when all this happens, and say in the Old Testament, and go through, there's a trumpet there's a cloud here, that'll be an interesting thing to do.
There are lots of problems with this view. For instance, many of the parallels that we see with the Thessalonian letters and Matthew 24 just don't apply to Armageddon.
But like I was pointing out, you get a lot of this just with the two witnesses going up. You know what I mean? And so if you apply that to some of the other raptures that happen in Revelation 14 and Revelation 15, you have a lot of this stuff happening as well. And so they've just grabbed one and just gone, well, there's some similar wording here. It must be exactly the same. Instead of looking at the biblical context, they're just looking at a few words here and there.
The events in Matthew 24, verses 20.
And you got to understand, these are people who are deleting the last 12 verses of Mark on the witness of two manuscripts over 1,637 others that have it. And these two manuscripts, oftentimes they'll appeal to them, but then they'll appeal to internal inconsistencies and say, well, Mark, he wasn't using the same words from Mark chapter 16, verse 9 through to the end. He was using different words. It's like, well, it's after the resurrection. And he's talking about, the Great Commission and all this sort of stuff. So it's going to be completely different to the chapter before and most of the other chapters, because it's like a finale. But they're like, oh, there's a lot of words that aren't the same. And it's like that. It's coming from that type of crew. Alan Kirshner, he's helped James White write his book. He's got this type of thing about him, delete last 12 verses of Mark. So they're going to look at these things and go, oh, that matches, oh, that doesn't, oh, that doesn't sound Pauline to me, and all this sort of weird sort of stuff.
29 to 31 and the events at Armageddon are fundamentally different. In Matthew, there is a rescue of God's people from the earth to heaven. But in Armageddon, Jesus returns from heaven to destroy the wicked people on the earth.
Okay, so I'll just note that these guys have made a huge error, which I have shown many times before, but I'm glad this came up. So they're saying the salvation is a gathering from earth to heaven. Okay, so I'm going to completely disprove this. So let's just go to Matthew 24. So Matthew 24, now it clearly says, and then shall appear the sign of the Son of Man in heaven. Okay, so it says, and he shall send his angels with the great sound of a trumpet, and they shall gather together his elect. And it says, from the four winds. So that means from every direction, northeast, southwest, the four winds, from one end of heaven to the other. Okay, so it's not saying he's going to gather them from earth and then take them to heaven, is it? Here it just clearly says he's gathering them from the four winds. He's gathering them from one end of heaven to the other. So they're already in heaven and he's gathering them. Okay. So let's look at Luke 21 and what that says. Okay, it says okay, it doesn't really say much in Luke 21. It's Mark 13 that says it, but it just has here, then they shall see the sign of the Son of Man coming in a cloud with power and great glory. Okay, so it's interesting. I love these two verses. When these things begin, now notice in Matthew 24 it had the beginning of sorrows. When these things begin to come to pass, then look up, lift up your head, for your redemption draweth nigh. It's quite amazing. And this other verse that says, watch ye therefore, and pray always that you may be accounted worthy to escape all these things that shall come to pass and to stand before the Son of Man. So you can escape all of these things. I remember listening to Standing for Truth, and someone rang up and mentioned that. And he was like, where is this verse? He didn't even know, really, that was a verse. It's like, are you just studying these things to be anti-pretrib? why aren't you looking at these verses? These verses prove that you can escape these things. Look at the word escape. I guess they'll try and redefine it as something else, and maybe it's the Antichrist morphing into something, or some sort of weird thing, or reincarnation. 144,000 just reincarnated Jews, and Jews don't exist anymore, and all this weird stuff. But anyway, we're going through it and we're trying to understand what they're saying. So let's go to Mark 13, so we can finish up the thought that I'm trying to bring across. Mark 13 says, now listen to this. He shall gather together his elect from the four winds. Look at the four winds there again. From the uttermost part of the earth to the uttermost part of heaven. Now, when you look at this verse, it's not saying he's gathering them from the earth and bringing them to heaven. Okay. Now, remember in Matthew 24, it was clearly saying he's from one end of heaven to the other. Okay. Here it's saying from the uttermost part of the earth. So all the way from the, I guess New Zealand is supposedly, the uttermost parts of the earth, to the uttermost parts of heaven. So right up in the deepest corner of heaven. That's where he's going to gather them from. Not he's going to gather them from earth to bring them to heaven. But that's clearly what they're teaching here. They're gathering from earth to heaven. Now let's just look at the context of this. And then he shall send his angels and shall gather together his elect from the four winds, from every direction. Not gather them just from only from earth. It's from everywhere, from the uttermost parts of heaven, all the way to the uttermost part. The uttermost part of the earth, all the way to the uttermost part of heaven. So it's like me saying, we're going to gather you all from the uttermost part of the United States to the uttermost part of Mexico. We're going to find you. Like, imagine a police officer saying that. We're going to find these killers. We're going to search the uttermost parts of the United States to the uttermost parts of Mexico. We will find them. It's not saying that he's going to go from America to Mexico. He's saying this is included in the search. And so this is included in the gathering. So Matthew 24 is clearly saying he's gathering them from heaven, from the uttermost parts of heaven. Here it's saying the uttermost parts of the earth, all the way through to the uttermost parts of heaven. So it's pretty much in every place that exists. That's where his people are going to be. Now, at the end of the 7-year tribulation, after there has been an initial rapture, a rapture of tribulation saints, a rapture of 2 witnesses, a rapture of the 144,000, a reaping of believers, and then another reaping of those who didn't take the mark of the beast. Then the 7th one is this, when they're all gathered. So some are in heaven, there are some on earth, and so he's gathering them all together and into one place. So that's what's happening here. So these guys have it wrong where they're saying this is a gathering from earth to heaven. So they're reading the rapture into this, but they're not looking at these details properly. Okay. So here in Revelation 11 to 16, it says, from heaven to earth, destruction of the wicked. Okay, so let's just read Revelation 19. Revelation 19. After these things I heard a great voice of much people in heaven. A whole bunch of people in heaven, okay, saying, Hallelujah. Salvation and glory and honor and power unto the Lord our God, for true and righteous are his judgments, for he hath judged the great whore, which did corrupt the earth with her fornication, and hath avenged the blood of his servants at her hand. And again they said, Alleluia, and the smoke of and her smoke arose up forever and ever. And the 24 elders and the 4 beasts fell down and worshipped God that sat on the throne, saying, Amen, Alleluia. And the voice came out of the throne, saying, Praise our God, all ye his servants, and ye that fear him, both small and great. And I heard, as it were, the voice of a great multitude, and as the voice of many waters, and as the voice of mighty thundering, saying, Alleluia, for the Lord God omnipotent reigneth. So this is all in heaven, there's a great multitude there. Let us be glad and rejoice and give honor to him, for the marriage of the Lamb is come, and his wife have made herself ready. And to her was granted that she should be arrayed in fine linen, white and clean and white, for the fine linen is a righteousness of saints. The New King James says the righteous acts of the saints, which is pretty bizarre. And he saith unto me, Right, blessed are they which are called to the marriage supper of the Lamb. And he saith unto me, These are the true sayings. So they're just saying, like, look at what they're saying. It says, it's just from heaven to earth, destruction of wicked. So what about the marriage supper of the Lamb and all this sort of stuff? You can read the context. You don't just look up cloud and go, well, there's another cloud there. It all matches up. Wrath, yep, there's wrath there and wrath there, so they're the same thing. Okay, so I fell at his feet to worship him, and he said, So that you do not do it, I am thy fellow servant and all thy brethren, which have the testimony of Jesus. Worship God, for the testimony of Jesus is the spirit of prophecy. And I saw heaven opened, and behold, a white horse, and he that sat upon him was faithful and true, and in righteousness he doth judge and make war. His eyes were as a flame of fire, and on his head were many crowns, and he had a name written which no man knew but he himself. And he was clothed with a vesture dipped in blood, and his name is called the Word of God. And the armies which were in heaven followed him upon white horses, clothed in fine linen, white and clean. Doesn't that sound like the saints? But it says, From heaven to earth, destruction of wicked. Or wouldn't it be from heaven to earth with armies in white, all that? It's and out of his mouth goeth a sharp sword, that with it he should smite the nations, and he shall rule them with a rod of iron, and he treadeth the winepress of the fierceness of the wrath of Almighty God. And he hath on his vesture and on his thigh a name written, King of Kings and Lord of Lords. And I saw an angel standing in the sun, and he cried with a loud voice, saying to all the fowls that fly in the midst of heaven, Come and gather yourself together for the supper of the great God, that ye may eat the flesh of kings, and the flesh of captains, and the flesh of mighty men, and the flesh of horses, and of them that sit on them, and the flesh of all men, both free and bond, both small and great. And I saw the beast and the king of the earth and their armies gathered together to make war against him that sat on the horse and against his army. And the beast was taken, with him the false prophet that wrought miracles before him, with which he deceived them, and which he them that had received the mark of the beast, and them that worshipped the image. These both were cast alive into the lake of fire, burning with brimstone, and the remnant were slain with the sword of him that sat upon the horse, which sword proceedeth out of his mouth, and all the fowls were filled with their flesh. And then it continues on, and I saw an angel come down from heaven, having the key of the bottomless pit and a great chain in his hand. And so, Satan gets thrown in there for 1,000 years, and then there's 1,000 years, and then I saw thrones, or it's talking about this millennium thing that he's going to be loose for a little season after that. Then thrones, they that sat upon them, judgment was given unto them, the souls that were beheaded for the. So all this happens as well. It's not like, Revelation 19, that's it. No, you keep reading, and you see, there's a blessing. There's all these sort of things happening, and then you got the 1,000-year millennium happening after that. And so just to go, salvation gathering from earth to heaven, which is wrong, and then go, okay, from heaven to earth, destruction of wicked, that's it. No, well, what about the marriage supper of the Lamb and the acknowledgement of all those who, avoided the mark of the beast and all that sort of stuff? It's like there's a lot else happening.
But the biggest problem with the Armageddon view and the one pre-trib scholars in the last few years have been scrambling to solve, comes from...
So you notice now they're saying that pre-trib scholars are scrambling to solve this. No, they're not. We're not scrambling to solve anything. Maybe people who have been a little bit duped into the position of Rosenthal, they've read this book and they're like, oh, geez, got a good point there. And then they're trying to figure it out and all the rest of it. But most people are not. Most people are like, oh, okay, well, this is a new position. What's it all about? And they read through it and go, this is silly. And it doesn't bother them at all. Now we're scrambling to just sort of make up anything because we have a position, we got a tradition, and we don't want to let it go because we're just dishonest dimwits, I guess.
From the obvious contradictions this view creates with the second half of the Olivet Discourse.
So in the latter part of Matthew 24 and Matthew 25, we are introduced to many parables of Jesus concerning the day and hour and readiness for his coming. And from a pre-tribulational perspective, this proves to be a problem in many different ways, regardless of the way it's interpreted, which are various.
To set the stage, it's important to remember a basic outline of the Olivet Discourse.
And I'm just waiting for that little bubble to come up and say, there's no precursors to the rapture. They just keep repeating that, but let's keep going.
The disciples ask Jesus what the signs of his coming will be. Then Jesus gives them a fairly large list of signs, ending with the coming itself, i.e., the rapture in verses 30 and 30.
No, it's the second coming. It is a type of rapture, a type of gathering, but it's the seventh that happens in a sequence, with the first one being the rapture of the church, and then rapture of the tribulation saints, etc.
31. From that point on, after verse 31, and going all the way through chapter 25, Jesus tells his disciples various parables about how important it is for them to watch for the signs of his return, signs he just got done telling them about.
And see, notice what they've done. They've prepped their audience to say, see, these guys aren't looking for any signs. They can't have any signs. If they have signs, they lose. We win. I'm like, no, I've always had signs. Everyone I've heard preach eschatology that I've agreed with, they've always said that there are going to be signs. Look for the signs of the times. Like even when I first got saved, because I was writing to death metal and all that sort of stuff. So in the church that I was in, they actually encouraged any type of music. If you could do rap, if you could do anything, as long as it was full-on Christian. All the words had to be in heaven, hell, get saved, blood of Jesus, born again, all that sort of stuff. And so, and we even had a song, read the signs, understand the times, because the writing's on the wall. It's like, just look at the signs. They're happening all around us. The rapture's going to happen soon, all this sort of stuff. And so, and then for someone to come along and say, you can't have any signs. It's just like, what? It's, to me, it's just a straw man argument. But like I said, there probably are groups in America that believe this, but it's definitely not the crew that I've been hanging around.
It is in this last section where pre-tribbers have so many problems to solve.
No, I don't have any problems to solve. It makes perfect sense to pre-tribulationists, but it's a problem because it doesn't fit in with your sandwiched, squishy type of eschatology, your brand new eschatology. And so we'll go through these.
Because when they changed the meaning of verses 30 and 31 from the rapture to Armageddon.
And see, this is where I haven't changed the meaning from rapture to Armageddon. To me, this has always meant the second coming of Jesus Christ. But then you guys, with your new understanding of the rapture in 1990, came along and went, okay, instead of that being the second coming, so even look, it says in the Bible they're reading, which I don't know what version it is, the coming of the Son of Man. That's what's usually said. It rare, like, I would love for them to point out any Bible that has the rapture here in the heading. They're just putting it in there and saying that's what it means, and it's like, no, most people have seen this as the second coming when Jesus puts his feet on the Mount of Olives. So then they're saying, oh no, they've always seen it as the rapture. Then they're saying, oh, well, because they struggled so much with figuring all this other stuff out afterwards, that they had to change it to Armageddon. Now, like I've said, some people do believe and think that it's Armageddon. I don't. I think Armageddon happens around that time, but they're unrelated events. Now, they are related because you probably have a lot of the same people involved with Armageddon and other things that happen. But to say that it is the Battle of Armageddon, I don't think it is. I think it's a separate thing. So to me, that's usually when I'm talking to Jehovah's Witnesses. They're like, if you become a Jehovah's Witness, you'll be saved from Armageddon. You're heaping up good works for the Battle of Armageddon and all this sort of stuff.
They changed the meaning of these parables as well. And these parables just don't make sense if verses 30 and 31 are anything but the rapture. For example,
in your timeline and in your, after the mid-trib position rapture.
In one of these parables, it says that no one knows the day or the hour of Jesus' coming. And while many layman pre-tribbers will quote this verse in reference to the rapture, they do this ignorantly. The pre-trib scholars know that if they have changed verse 31 to be about Armageddon, then they must make this not knowing the day or the hour to be about Armageddon.
Not necessarily. I'll just go back here. Because when you read Matthew 24, now I'll get it up here. Where are we? Matthew 24. So you read through a whole bunch of stuff that's going to happen. To me, this is where the end comes. The rapture happens here, because then the abomination of desolation is all, that's something that happens. And then those who are in Judea flee to the mountains. It's like, why are you thinking it's talking to Jewish people? Okay, it doesn't say New York there, does it? You know what I mean? It's just like, duh. But apparently no Jews exist anymore. They're all dead, or they're all just assimilated. You can get Greeks, you can get Italians, you can get Germans, you can get Russians, you can get Australians. You can't get any Jews anymore. So then he's talking, and so then he says, the Sabbath day, don't let your flight be on the Sabbath day. And he's talking about there's going to be huge tribulation. Those days are going to be shortened. Okay. But then he has this break here. Okay. And he says, if anyone says to you, like, here's Christ or there, don't believe it. And to me, this is like what he's doing. He's setting the stage for saying, look, when I come, it's going to be a sudden thing. I'm going to be there, I'm going to be there in person with my feet on the ground. Every eye is going to see it. It's not going to be like, oh, Jesus has come. He's in Nepal in a cave. Yeah, let's go and see him, or he's in a manger or something like that. It's not going to be like that. It's going to be, feet on the ground, boots on the ground, I should say, and he's going to be on the Mount of Olives, and every eye will see him. So then he's saying, these false Christs, false prophets, they're going to deceive people. So he's talking about like popes. He's talking about people who say they're Christs. All these type of things. I've told you this before. So if they say it's in the secret chambers, don't believe it. And he's saying, for as the lightning comes out of the east to the west, so will the coming of the Son of Man be. So he's saying this, it's not like this is only relative to the tribulation period. This is relevant to then, but it's also relevant to all of us in all ages. We don't go, we don't just discard this as only the future. We go, well, yeah, false prophets and they can bring signs and wonders that deceive people and all this. But why do I say that? Because if we look at the book of Luke 17, oops. We see pretty much the same thing written here. It says, and he's very clear. When the kingdom of God should come, he answered and said, the kingdom of God comes not with observation. Neither shall they say, lo here, lo there, for behold, the kingdom of God is within you. And then he says to his disciples, the days will come when you shall desire to see one of the days of the Son of Man, and you shall not see it. And they shall say to you, see here or see there. Go not after them, nor follow them. For as the lightning, so he's saying, people will say, apparently Jesus he's in Rome now. Or it's like, no, he's not. He said he'll come as lightning comes out of one part of heaven and shines to the other part of heaven. So also will the Son of Man be in his day. And so he's clearly talking about the suddenness of everything that happens. Okay, when you go to Matthew 24 and you read through that, you go, okay, well, he's talking about the future like it's a historical event, and then he's going, okay, well, this is a bit of an interlude. So then he talks about these things here. Immediately after the tribulation, the sun darkened, the moon will not give it light. Notice it doesn't say the moon turns to blood. It's a different thing. And then it goes down to here, and it says, now learn the parable of the fig tree. So is this still the historical narrative? No. But he's trying to talk about, okay, when the branch is tender and puts forth leaves, you know that summer is nigh. Likewise, when you see all these things, know that it's near, even at the door. When you see these things, you get ready. Okay. This generation shall not pass till all these things will be fulfilled. Heaven and earth will pass away, but my words won't pass away. The day of the hour knoweth no man. And so he goes through, and then he talks about Noah, and then he's talking about two in the field, etc., and then about a thief. And so he's talking about lots of different things here. So this is no longer step one, run to the hills. Step two, do this. It's talking about concepts of like, I'm going to come quickly. So, if even the whole thief concept, that only fits in with the rapture. It doesn't work in their timeline. So anyway, I just thought I'd mention that because they're trying to make out that everything has to now be according to Armageddon. It's like, no, Jesus talked about certain things here, certain things there. You just got to read the context. You can't just go, Matthew 24 is all talking about the second coming, or Matthew 24 is all talking about the rapture, or Matthew 24 is all talking about the tribulation period, or Matthew 20. It's like, just read it. You should be able to, work out which parts are relative. Just read, and I'm not just saying read it once. Read it for 2 months, every day, 5 times a day. Go through it. Look up words in dictionaries, look up words in Greek, study these things, look at all the commentaries on it, and think about these things.
They must make this not knowing the day or the hour to be about Armageddon. After all, according to them, Jesus wasn't talking about the rapture at any point in this chapter. And in context,
so notice, according to them, well, according to me, he does speak about the rapture in that chapter.
Whatever verses 30 to 31 are referring to is what the parables that follow them have to be about. So they're stuck having to defend the idea that no one will know the day or the hour of Armageddon. The problem here is that we know from several other verses in Scripture that the day Armageddon occurs will be exactly 7 years and 30 days after the covenant is made by the Antichrist, and exactly 1,290 days after the abomination of desolation at the midpoint. In other words, since it seems very likely people will at least know when the abomination of desolation at the midpoint occurs, since Jesus says people should flee when they see it, all anyone would have to do is calculate the days from that event to arrive at the day Armageddon will occur. Commentaries from pre-tribbers either don't mention this problem at all, or admit it's a problem but offer no solutions. John MacArthur is a good example of the latter. In his commentary he says, "Nevertheless, even with all those indisputable signs and precisely designated periods, the exact day and hour will not be known by any human beings, not even tribulation believers, in advance, although the Lord gives no reason for their not knowing." David Guzik says something similar in his commentary. In this there is a dilemma. How can the day of Jesus' coming be both completely unknown and at the same time be known to the day, according to Daniel 12, verse 11? Another problem.
Doesn't the pre-trib rapture solve those things? You know what I mean? Anyway.
Caused by interpreting verse 31 as anything other than the rapture is that twice in these parables, Jesus says that one will be taken and one will be left. If this is talking about the rapture, then it flows quite naturally from the gathering in the clouds in verse 31, and it makes perfect sense in context. But because of the pre-tribulational teaching that verses 30 and 31 are about Armageddon, pre-tribbers must interpret this one being taken here as either Armageddon or the sheep and goat judgment. Basically, they must see this being taken as a bad thing for unsaved people. They must interpret it as a wicked person being taken to be judged.
It's quite amazing, because the whole concept of the Left Behind series is that one should be taken and the other left behind. You know what I mean? And they're trying to say that these pre-trib guys are teaching that this is the wicked person. The wicked person is being taken to be judged, and the saved person is the one left behind. And so it's, you know, they're clutching at straws here. Now, I know Thomas Ice does have a different opinion on who the left behind are, saying that some are left behind for judgment and things like that. But anyway, let's just continue.
Instead of a righteous person being taken to their eternal reward. It's a full reversal from historical Christianity on this point. In defense of this, they will point to the parable in the previous verses about Noah, in which Jesus talked about how the flood came and took people away. They say that since the word sometimes translated took in that passage was about being taken for judgment, the flood came and took the unbelievers away. That is how the word taken in verses 40 and 41 should be understood, that the one was taken for judgment, not rescue.
Okay, so I'll just go back there. So they're saying that these words can't be related. Okay, so let's look at this is their Bible. So, you know, maybe I should really get Matthew 24 in the King James, 39 and 40. I might do that. Matthew 24, here we are, 39 and 40. And knew not until the flood came and took them all away, so shall also the coming of the Son of Man be. It says, then shall two be in the field, and one shall be taken, the other left. So it's clearly relative to this previous verse. So let's look in their version now. So it says, and knew not until the flood came and took them away, so shall also the coming of the Son of Man be. Then two shall be in the field. So it's clearly got the then. Shall two be in the field, the one shall be taken and the other left. So it's even in their version, it's got the semicolon there, which means it's sort of saying a very similar concept. So it's saying, and knew not until the flood came and took them away, so shall also the coming of the Son of Man be. So the flood's going to come and take them all away. Then shall two be in the field, one shall be taken and the other left. Two women should be grinding at the mill, one should. So it's sort of like, you know, this is what happened in the flood. The people were taken. The others were left, I guess, in the boat. Anyway, I'm just trying to look at it from their perspective, and so they're saying the word "took" and "taken" can't be related, and because of different Greek words. And this is what sort of really annoys me, because some Greek words are just synonymous. They can be completely different, but they can have a very similar meaning. So I might even be able to look up these words.
It should be understood that the one was taken for judgment, not rescue.
The truth is, the Greek actually precludes this from being.
Okay, so hapas. Let's look at the Spiros Zodhiates Greek. I'm committing a sin here, apparently, according to some of these guys in Standing for Truth, by actually going to the Greek. They love it when you're defending the King James, but they hate it when you're going through eschatology. They're like, why would you go to the Greek? It's pretty bizarre. It's full Gale Riplinger on steroids. But hapas. So I wonder if it's just apas with a breathing mark. Apas. I wish they put the number there. I could probably look that number up quite easily. Ema apas. Apas. Apex. No, that means one. Okay. My Greek interlinear. Interlinear Greek New Testament. Recommend everyone gets one of these. It's been very valuable for me over the years. Matthew 24. 39 plus 24, 39. They knew until it came and took. Oh, it's not even a pass. 142. And the other one's like Paralambano. Okay, so 142. Okay, here we are. Now I'm just looking for Matthew 24. It's quite amazing when you look at, and knew not until the flood came and took them all away. Okay. So shall the coming of the Son of Man be. Okay. So listen to this. It's the arrow, which means to take up, to lift up, to raise, particularly as stones from the ground. And then it's got heaps of scripture references, but I won't read them all. Serpents, so that's like Mark 16:18, they shall take up serpents. Anchors, Book of Acts. The hand, Revelation 10:5, also in the Septuagint, etc. Figuratively, to raise, to elevate, the eyes, the voice, meaning to cry out, to sing, also in the Septuagint, to hold the mind or soul of someone suspended in suspense or doubt, meaning to take up or place on oneself, to take up, to bear, meaning to carry. They shall bear you in the hands, also Septuagint, my yoke, the cross, to take up or carry with one, meaning three, to take up or carry, meaning to take away, to remove by carrying, spoken of a bed, of a dead body, a person, and so forth. Bread, with the idea of laying up, making use of, generally be thou removed in a metaphorical sense, to take away sin, meaning the imputation or punishment of sin, to bear the punishment of sin, to take away the, by taking upon oneself, meaning number 4, to take away, to remove, with the idea of lifting away from, usually with the idea of violence and authority. A, particularly the new piece of that tears away still more of the old garment of branches, meaning to cut off, to prune, spoken of persons, meaning to take away or remove from a church, excommunicate, to take away or remove out of the world by death, and so forth. So it's Matthew 24:39. So that's what he has there. In his humiliation and oppression was his sentence. He was torn away, meaning hurried away to death. Acts, Isaiah, etc. In the imperfect has away with, meaning put out of the way, to kill, figuratively, and it's got a bunch of figurative concepts there. Now we can look at synonyms, and it's, notice one of the synonyms is lambano. So I just sort of found that one, because we're going to look at paralambano. So para is usually just like a side, something alongside, and so but I'm going to just check and see, because that's the next one we'll look up. So we're looking at 40, verse 40. Where are we here? Verse 40 says, 2 will be in the fair, 1 will be taken away. Paralambanatai, 3880. Okay, so let's look at 3880. And it's probably going to be really big, which it is. Paralambano, from para, which means from, and lambano, to take, to receive. So notice to take and to receive are similar. That's why sometimes in Revelation chapter 13, it has a footnote that says that he will cause all to take a mark of, to receive a mark. And then it has a footnote in the original 1611, or to give. So they're just acknowledging that sometimes paralambano can mean to give or to take. It just depends on the context. Because in ancient cultures, if you gave someone something, you would get something back. It's just the way that they work. To take near with, or to oneself, or to receive to oneself, to take to oneself, seize, or take into one's possession. In the New Testament, used only of persons, to take unto one, to take unto or with oneself as an associate or companion, with the accusative. He's got a bunch of scriptures with the ice, to followed the accusative. So he's just got a whole bunch of technical things there. But I'm just looking for Matthew 24. I can't see it yet. Used pleonastically and synonymously with the basic verb lambano. So it's quite interesting that they're saying that these things are not related, but Spiros Zodhiades is saying lambano is related. It's just amazing. I'll look at the synonyms here. I can't really, because I can't remember the exact form of how it was. But anyway, okay, Matthew 24:40. The verb paralambano is to be contrasted in Matthew 24:40, 41 to aero. So this is the exact issue. To take up and away. It is used to refer to those in the days of Noah who were taken away, not being favored but being punished, while Noah and his family were left intact. Therefore, in this passage, Matthew, and the parallel passage in Luke, paralambano must not be equated to the believers who are to be raptured at the coming of the Lord for his saints. It refers rather to those who, as in the days of Noah, are taken to destruction. The others are left alone for the purpose of entering into the blessing. Excuse me. Into the blessings of Christ's kingdom, identifying by some of the millennium and the righteous rule of Christ upon the earth. The word paralambano is also used in relation to a teacher to receive knowledge, etc. So he has actually a whole section here where he's saying, even though it looks like you could relate these two words, you shouldn't. It's not the rapture. And it's like, sometimes I find spirits of Hades will just go against everything. Like when he was talking about like sign gifts and things like that, he said, "Oh, that's only for the 12 disciples." But it's like, well, why did then the 120 get all those gifts and the Church of Corinth? And it just seems really dumb to say that. But anyway, he sort of goes right out of his way to say this. So this must be an actual problem that people are dealing with. So it's interesting. So you've got, and took them away. So in that context, okay, so we've got to work out who do these guys think that got taken away? Was it the bad people who got taken away, or was it Noah and his family that got taken away by God? For as in the days that were before the flood, they were eating and drinking, marrying and giving in marriage until the day that Noah entered the ark, and knew not until the flood came and took them all away. But perhaps that took is in a positive sense, so shall the coming of the Son of Man be. Then two shall be in the field, and one shall be taken, paralambano, so that would fit in into a positive sense. So anyway, it's definitely something worth looking into and thinking about and studying. So let's see what else these guys have to say on that. And I've already gone for about 2 hours, and as you can tell, I'm getting really tired. So we'll just continue on a little bit.
A possibility. Two different words are actually being used. And the one taken is to receive to oneself, to receive warmly. In fact, it's the same word Jesus uses in the departing discourse in John.
So you notice these guys like, okay, this is the same word, but what they're doing is they're using just like the stem word, the paralambano. They're not looking at the context. So there's two different ways you can define a word. There's the contextual definition and there's a lexical definition. So lexical definition is what these guys are doing. You look it up in a lexicon and you go, oh, well, it just means this. But then there's the context. You've got to read through the context and you've got to figure it out yourself. You go through and it clearly says that this word sort of means this type of thing. And so you got to go with that. You can't, if it says God is love, well, you got to believe that. You can't just look up everywhere else and say, oh no, it means something different or whatever. It's like, no, it just means God is love. And so two will be in the field, one shall be taken and the other left. If I go and prepare a place for you, I will come and receive you unto myself. So because I'm not really sure, because they're like, well, pre-trib guys are scrambling to fix this problem, and here's some other concept that you probably never heard of, but apparently pre-trib guys believe this, and someone's written a book about it, and so you probably believe it too. And so, but I understand it would be hard to debunk every pre-tribber because there are differences of opinion out there. But let's continue.
Which I will not leave you, but I will, as orphans, but I will come again and I will receive you unto myself.
And if I go to make a place ready for you, I will come again and take you, per Lovano, take you to be with me so that where I am, you may be also, and you know the way where I am going. So here, Jesus uses the term perilambano. And guess what? Every pre-trib interpreter believes that John 14, this John 14 passage, when Jesus says, I will take you to be with me, is referring to the rapture.
So every pre-trib person believes that. Okay, so let's look at that verse. If I go and prepare a place for you, I will come again and receive you to myself, that where I am, there you may be also. In my Father's house are many rooms, or it says mansions here. If it were not so, I would have told you. I go there to prepare a place for you. And if I go and prepare a place for you, I will come again and receive you to myself, that where I am, you may be also. So the concept of receive you to myself. I'm going there to prepare a place, and I will come again. I can understand some people would see this as a preparation for the raptured saints. But more so, I would say that this is probably going to be the preparation of their forever home, which is the New Jerusalem. I mean, if this place only exists for like 7 years and then we're ruling and reigning on the earth for 1,000 years, I mean, yeah, nice 7 years, but it's like, you know, he's going there to prepare. Yeah, he's been there for like 2,000 years preparing this place. What, for a 7-year period? It's sort of like we've already got a heaven. We've already got it's already pretty good. Yeah, it's good enough for Jesus. Should be good enough for us. I think this could be. I'm just sort of being devil's advocate here and just sort of saying, well, you know, perhaps if I, you know, this could be that, but perhaps it could be the New Jerusalem. You know. He's preparing this place. And so in preparation for this place, he's preparing a place for them in a sense where more and more people are getting saved. He's forever interceding to the Father. He is constantly, you know, calling people to be saved. And this is the place that's getting prepared, because it's a place not built with, you know, real stone and rock, and it's built with the saints who go in the first resurrection. So
to be with me is referring to the rapture.
Another argument for this one being taken being a reference to them being taken in the rapture and not being taken to judgment is that in the 10 virgins parable a few verses later, which is on the exact same subject, which we know because it ends with the exact same warning, watch because you do not know the day or the hour. It is only the wise virgins that are taken, not the foolish ones. In other words, the purpose of Jesus' warning to watch because you don't know the day or the hour is so that you can be a part of those that are taken, not left. Interpreting verse 31.
And so, but doesn't that go against all the left behind books? And it's like, see, these guys are arguing against someone who has a specific position which a lot of people don't agree with. And, you know, so I guess, you know, and like I was saying, it would be hard because you're sort of going, okay, well, who are we coming against? It seems like they're just coming against like Thomas Ice here.
As Armageddon is also logically incompatible with the next parable, in which Jesus says the wicked people of the world will be carefree and unaware before his coming. He says they will be marrying and being given in marriage, and eating and drinking, up until the very day of his coming.
I don't think we can take that concept literally and put it into the scenario, because it's just sort of saying that they were unaware. Okay, so the people in Noah's day, for the days before the flood, they were eating and drinking, marrying and giving in marriage until the day Noah entered into the ark. And they were unaware until the flood came and swept them all away. So will the coming of the Son of Man be. So it's not like we would go, well, you know, we're going to be drinking and marrying and giving in, like exactly the same thing. It's just sort of talking about the carefree attitude that they have. They weren't thinking about that. But like, to me, this whole seeming parallel contradiction is solved by the pre-trib rapture. And so you have, this whole thing about talking about the second coming, but then it's talking about clearly that, no one knows the day. And then it's talking clearly about you've got to be ready, you've got to be alert. And then when you read, a lot of people only read Matthew 24, or you read Luke 21, Mark 13, and you put all those pieces together. It clearly says in among this type of material that you can escape all these things that are coming on the earth. Lift up your head. When you see these things begin to take place, lift up your head, for your redemption draws nigh. And so those guys will never mention that sort of stuff. Yeah, they should, if they want to be really honest with our position. We go to those verses and say, well, they're part of this text as well.
This creates a huge problem, since according to the pre-trib interpretation, this would mean that the wicked are relatively carefree right up until the day of the Battle of Armageddon, even though Armageddon takes place at the very end of the 7-year period, after the trumpet and bowl judgments have been poured out. To put this in context, at this time every living thing in the sea will be dead. All the fresh water in the world will be undrinkable. The sun will be so hot that no one can bear it. Everyone will have been plagued with terrible sores, and there will have been 5 solid months of torment from demonic, scorpion-like beings directly from the pit of hell. I could go on, but I think it's safe to say people will have noticed that the wrath of God has started, and that they would not be living carefree lives right up until the day the Battle of Armageddon begins. There are precious few pre-trib commentaries that even attempt to justify this idea. Again, the most common
because I don't know anyone who's teaching this, and so it's like, anyway, I'm just seeing confusion here. For as in the days before the flood, they were eating and drinking, marrying, giving in marriage until the day that Noah entered the ark, and did not know until the flood came and took them all away. So also will the coming of the Son of Man be. And so see, this is the problem with the pre-wrath guys, is they have a different set of rules. So what they do is they get this verse and they're like, see, it doesn't fit in our timeline. It doesn't fit when we've put the rapture right at the end now, so it doesn't fit there. It's like, no, most pre-trib guys would read this and go, well, this is before the rapture. And so then they're like, but Matthew 24 is about the Armageddon, and so everything has to be about Armageddon. It's like, well, no. He goes back and he's talking about parables. So he's talking about certain aspects and be ready, because when this starts to happen, and they're just like, what? Just the ending of it starts to happen. It's like, no, when it begins, read Luke 21. And so they're just taking things out of context. And it's a bit like trying to play baseball on a cricket pitch. It's a completely different game. And they're like, see, I've hit it that way, so it should be this many points. And it's like, yeah, but it's, you've got to explain our position correctly. And I don't think that they even explain their position correctly. So anyway, let's continue.
Tactic is to not mention the problem at all. But pre-tribulational scholars have recognized the various problems that interpreting verses 30 and 31 as Armageddon has caused. And in the last decade or so, there have been 2 competing theories from them to answer their critics on these issues. One from Dr. Craig Blazing of Southwestern Baptist Theological Seminary, and one from Dr. John Hart of Moody Bible Institute. While Blazing's theory gained popularity from being featured in Zondervan's 3 Views on the Rapture book, it's a somewhat convoluted argument, and in many ways it represents an entirely new way to teach pre-tribulationism. As a result, it seems to have had less acceptance among pre-tribulationists than Hart's theory.
So this guy wrote something and didn't really get accepted, but it's, apparently,
Though it should be noted that in both cases, these theories rely on the same underlying proof text. But More on that later. John Hart wrote a paper in 2007 that simply agreed with the historical church and the pre-wrath rapture proponents that all of the parables after verse 36 are in fact talking about the rapture and not Armageddon, thus avoiding the various contradictions we have been talking about. The unique thing about Hart's view is that he maintains that the first part of the Olivet Discourse, including verse 30 and 31, is still a reference to Armageddon as pre-tribbers have taught since the 1800s.
Notice he's saying that this guy is saying this whole thing is Armageddon. Like, I just, it's just, to me, this is just bizarre. And, you know, people who I know who have, they've gone, you know, I mean, I used to have the pre-tribulation, the encyclopedia of premillennial, the premillennial dictionary. And so it goes through, if you look up the 144,000, it tells you what that is. Look up the rapture, it tells you what it is. Look up Armageddon, tells you what that is. And so I remember giving that as a present from my first pastor back in the 90s. And so it's not like we haven't been reading this stuff and going through material, but it's just, these guys are just like, this whole thing, Matthew 24 is all Armageddon, but then after verse 35 it stops and it goes back to the rapture. But see, then they conflate the rapture with the second coming in verse 29, 30, 31. And so what I think what they're trying to do is just confuse people. They're just sort of like, see, this guy wants to put this here and this other guy wants to put it over there and we want to put it there and there. And they're not being very clear. And I think they're purposely not being clear. So people are just like, what do they believe? This is so weird. This is, and just having these two random guys who apparently are trying to, fix a problem somewhere. And it's like, well, they believe this, they believe that. And it's like, okay, well, why don't you just stick with the usual type of narrative? You know what I mean?
So he is essentially saying the first half of the Olivet Discourse has nothing to do with the second half. That Jesus was teaching his followers about the signs leading up to Armageddon until verse 35, and then, for some reason, he reversed the order of events and began to teach parables about the rapture in verse 36. Both Hart and Blazing's theories rely on the argument that in verse 36, the Greek phrase peri de, which is often translated now concerning, represents a transition to an entirely new topic. In other words, they argue that this Greek term gives them an excuse to decouple the first half of the Olivet Discourse from the second.
Hart argues, and Blazing does the same, that the transitional phrase in Greek in verse 36, peri de, which means now concerning, or something along those lines, is intended to distinguish or to mark the change from answering one question to the other.
However, since peri de basically means the same thing that the English phrase now concerning does, it can mean now concerning something entirely different, but it can also mean now concerning another aspect of the thing that was just discussed. It's used both ways multiple times in the New Testament.
Yeah. Okay. So you can take it either way. So I guess you guys are going to take it your way, and Pretrib guys are going to take it their way.
Matthew, it doesn't necessarily.
So you're sort of not really proving much here.
Mean that the author is going to a new, entirely different subject. Rather, it means that he may be discussing another aspect of the central focus at hand, which is exactly what's happening in Matthew 24.
But see, the thing is, they're not taking into consideration Mark 13 and Luke 21, where clearly when it's talking about these type of things, and also Luke 17, when it's talking about these type of things, it's very clear that it says you can watch and pray that you may be accounted worthy to escape all of these things and to stand before the Son of Man. where it says, when these things begin to take place, stand up and lift up your head, for your redemption draws nigh. If these guys are like, well, the whole chapter means this and that, well, if you take that verse, then that whole chapter, that whole concept of when these things begin to take place, you've got to go to the beginning of it. And when it's like, okay, you can escape all these things that are going to come to pass and to stand before the Son of Man, well, it means all of those things. And so, these guys are just looking at Greek words. This is what I'm finding. They're just looking up Greek words and going, oh, well, it appears here and it appears there. And so it means this, means that. But even they just had to admit that it can go either way. So then you're forced to look at the context. And so, heaven and earth will pass away, and look, from the fig tree, learn its lesson. So, it's, the King James, it has learned the parable of the fig tree. So it's talking about a parable here. So it's talking about all these type of things and talking about, Noah entering in the ark and then, talking about the Son of Man's coming at an hour you don't expect, like a thief and all this sort of stuff. Clearly this isn't just narrative. It's not just the same narrative as run from Judea and all this sort of stuff, is it?
The peri de line in verse 36 starts off, now concerning the day or the hour. So this is about the specific timing of something. Hart wants us to believe this is the first line on a totally new subject. But the problem is that this line is obviously a continuation of the question about the timing of the events begun in the parable of the fig tree.
But it's concerning that day or hour, no one knows. And so they say, what should be the sign of your coming in the end of the age? Okay. And so he specifically talks about the signs, and then he talks about the end of the age, and then he talks about the coming. And so it's all got to be taken into consideration that it's separated into those three things. So you can't just get everything that's mentioned after the whole block of text and go, well, this is only relating to the very last thing, the coming, of course. No, it's talking about when shall be the end of the age. And so being dispensationalist, you understand that the ending, when it says, but the end is not yet, for nation will rise against nation, kingdom against kingdom, etc. And then it says, this gospel of the kingdom shall be preached in all the world as witness to all nations, and then shall the end come. And it says, he that shall endure to the end shall be saved. That's in verse 14. So to me, that's when the end beginnings, the eschatos, the last days, the last 7 years happens, because the very next thing is the abomination of desolation, which is halfway through the 7-year period. And so, concerning that day and hour, no one knows. So they said, what will be the sign of thy coming? When shall all these things be? And what shall be the sign of thy coming and of the end of the age? There were 3 specific questions. These guys are acting like it's only one.
Just before this, the parable of the fig tree teaches that the followers of Christ should be able to determine the general time of his coming by the signs Jesus just described in Matthew 24, verses 4 to 31, and that his disciples could know his coming was near by looking for the signs, in the same way that they could know summer is near by observing the leaves on a fig tree. So with the fig tree parable, Jesus says that we will be able to know the general time, but in the next line he says, concerning, or peri de, the day or the hour, i.e. the specific time of my coming, no one will know.
It is a qualification then, because we do not know the exact day or hour. So we know the season, but we do not know the day or hour. So these two things complement one another, and they must be taken together.
Another criticism of Hart's view revolves around the term parousia, which is translated as coming. Since these new views of Hart and Blazing separate Matthew 24, beginning at verse 36, from the previous section, it would mean the question the disciples asked about the parousia in verse 3 is different from the answers about the parousia given by Jesus in verses 37 and 39.
They have to say that what Jesus refers to as the coming of the Son of Man is different from the coming of the Son of Man in Matthew 36 to 41.
See what they're doing here. I mean, what they want is if I come for, if I came to your house and got my dog, and then I came back and then I got my kids, and then I came back and got my wife, and then I came back and got a bunch of furniture that I bought off you, I would use the same word. You know what I mean? And so these guys are like, no, it has to be a completely different word. And then when you have a completely different word to describe certain things, they don't like that either. And so this is the problem. You can't have it one way and then not the other. And so, you know, these guys, and we're going to look at this next week. We're going to do a pretty big study into the apostasia. But the apostasia clearly meaning a departure, and the other side of the coin of harpazo. So these words are used very specifically and very distinctly about different exitings. But, you know, here it's like, okay, well, they're using the same word so that it can't be, you know, but in the other ones, it's like, oh, they're using a different word so it can't be. It's like, you can't have it both ways, you know. It's so they just want to have every argument is like separate, and they're using different tactics for each argument. And I think that's just a sign of inconsistency.
That's very difficult to maintain exegetically. There's no evidence within the text, not even the transitional phrase peride, that suggests he's shifting from one coming to some other coming. This is clear because when the disciples ask the question, they say, what is the sign of your coming? And Jesus just uses.
It clearly says, when shall these things be? And what shall be the sign of thy coming and of the end of the world, the end of the age? And so it's very clear, talking about the end of the age ends, the end of the dispensation, the end of the age of grace ends when the rapture happens. And so clearly it's talking about the end. And then we see in the from verse 3 down to verse 14, we see that word end is used several times. The end is not yet, but then it says, he that endures to the end shall be saved. And it says the gospel of the kingdom will be preached in all the world as a witness to all nations, and then shall the end come. So he's talking about the end of the age. And then we know that the abomination of desolation is in the middle of the week. So that's in the middle of the 70th week of Daniel. And so to me, the timeline that I have is just works out perfect. But these guys are only looking at two aspects here. Now, I know that they're focusing on the word coming, but it's like, okay, I'm sure that you can look up certain other things that are relative to many, many other concepts. And it doesn't have to be just the coming of Jesus, one Greek word, to the Mount of Olives, and then the coming of Jesus for his church in a rapture. It doesn't have to be a different Greek word. It can be the same word. But we see many other words used in 2 Thessalonians. It says, you know, that he that letteth will let until he be taken out of the way. And in Luke 21, it talks about, you know, that you can escape. Yeah, when you look up these words, depart, apostasia, escape, you know, fall away, harpazo, caught up. You look at all these words. There's so many words that talk about this. But sometimes these words are they're used in the same way. Sometimes they use different words. But you know, coming is a very common word. You know, so you've got to look at the context. You can't just look at a word, look it up in the Strong's Concordance and say, well, that's it.
That same language, his parousia, in both parts of the text. He doesn't give any indication that he's switching topics.
The bottom line is that the old Pretrib view, which has the parables at the end of the Olivet Discourse talking about Armageddon instead of the rapture, is a brand new argument with multiple contradictions, and pre-tribbers who know it. But the supposed fixes for this major problem, proposed in the last decade or so, which revolve around the idea that the first and second halves of the Olivet Discourse have nothing to do with one another, is an even worse argument. And now, hopefully some of you know it.
That was probably the most annoying response video that I've done in quite a while. I guess because it's not, they admitted at the end there that these two guys have these new type of views that have been put forward in the last 10 years or so, and they don't make much sense. And it's like, okay, what's that got to do with the average person believing in a Pretrib rapture? Now, maybe these guys have gotten popular. Maybe I'm missing something. Maybe maybe there's a whole new Left Behind series based upon their works or whatever. But it's like, at the end of the day, the Pretrib position is pretty simple, and you might get people like Thomas Ice believe one thing different than someone else, but most of the time it's pretty stock standard stuff. And these guys were just jumping all over the place with a lot of things, and so and I think by going to these other guys, it's like, man, well, where are you going with all this? You can't, that they have to sort of, like, if I was to say, okay, well, Alan Kirshner and the guys, they have the Rosenthal concepts, but the new IFB have, so this is a new understanding, but the new IFB have an even newer understanding, and so they've actually taken it further. But when you look at Stephen Anderson's material, or Tommy McMurtry's material, or Matt First, and all these other new IFB guys who have a similar position, it's even worse and it's even weirder. I mean, what would someone like Alan Kirshner think of me saying or exposing that? He would just go, well, that's not me. Well, why are you bringing those guys into it? And so I'm just looking at these other guys going, who are they? And I just don't think their views are very popular. So anyway, so what do we make of all this? Like I said at the beginning, Prewrath, Rapture of the Church book came out 1990, A New Understanding of the Rapture. This is new. Brand new, never seen before, sham wow eschatology. And so these guys are trying to make out that it's a historical position, trying to make out it's the position of the early church fathers and all this sort of stuff. It's like, no, it's a new understanding of the rapture, the tribulation, and the second coming. Okay, so well, thanks for joining us, guys. So the next video I do on this will be about the apostasia. So that should be really good, because I'm going to go through all of their material on that. It'll be a lot better, I think, than what we just went through with Matthew 24, which it was just confusion. Them conflating the second coming with the rapture and saying everyone just has always seen the rapture there. It's like, what are you talking about? The pre-trib rapture, or just a rapture, or the post-trib rapture? Well, what are you talking about? Just putting the word rapture there. It's just, you got to be a little bit more specific in your definitions there, guys. So anyway, God bless you, and we will see you next time. Thanks for joining us.